Today, a new moon is in the sky, a 23-inch metal sphere placed in orbit by a Russian rocket.
Almost 60 years ago, a satellite was launched into space by the Soviet Union, capturing imaginations around the world, while simultaneously setting off panic of imminent war here in the United States. This satellite, named Sputnik, led to some of the biggest education reforms America had ever seen. Let's look at how this happened. Okay, so in 1957, the United States and the Soviet Union were embroiled in a messy battle known as the Cold War. The US and the USSR were perfect enemies at the time. While they were two superpowers who liked to flex muscle and had a globe full of allies, they also embodied two different government philosophies. The US, a free, democratic, capitalist society, and the Soviet Union, a communist-run powerhouse of an army and government. Both countries had legitimate power and control and influence at the time, leading to this bitter and contentious battle. While not really a war as much as it was a race, the Cold War set off a massive spending spree by both nations to see who could finish the race with the most toys. Toys in this case being atomic bombs, missiles and missile technologies, and even space satellites and space shuttles. That's right, space exploration, an idea born of early man's curiosities and amazements, and written about by some of the greatest science fiction authors of all time, was now inching closer to becoming a reality. Each country wanted to be the first to travel into space, and thus, the space race had begun. The US wanted desperately to launch a satellite into space, but had failed several times to do so. These highly publicized failures had embarrassed the US and its space program. Then, in 1957, the Soviet Union surprised the world by unleashing its own satellite, Sputnik, by rolling it out into a remote desert and launching it into space. The Soviet Union had become the first country to launch a functional object into space and, more importantly, had beaten the US in this race. The satellite itself was nothing special to look at, a sphere the size of a large beach ball with 4 thin legs protruding from it. Sputnik was carried into space by a rocket that broke apart once it was past the Earth's atmosphere, sending Sputnik into an orbit around the world. Sputnik sent a beeping signal back to Earth that was picked up by radio and could be heard by millions of people in every country. Sputnik didn't last long in orbit, eventually falling harmlessly to the waters below. But the damage had already been done. The launch of Sputnik had sent America into a frenzy of fear. If the Soviets had technologies that allowed them to control space, then World War III would be a certainty, and we were doomed to become a Soviet-controlled communist country. Immediately, the United States government snapped into action, agreeing to increase the amount of money being spent on space exploration and exploration technologies. But they didn't stop there. They decided that our education system had failed our students in teaching areas of technology, science, math, and foreign language. In 1958, Congress passed the National Defense Education Act, which awarded billions in federal funds to improve instruction in those areas that were considered crucial. Not everyone was happy about this push for science education in the classroom. You see, the National Science Foundation sponsored textbooks written by professional biologists that stressed evolution. Increasingly, high schools began teaching evolution. But the new textbooks and reforms also spawned protests from many conservative Christians. Sputnik changed everything. The federal money wasn't just provided for specific classes like physics and calculus, but also toward the development of good teachers and sound teaching methods, leading to our more modern ideas on classroom management and student-teacher interaction. Today, our schools are a reflection of those ideas. Many of our current philosophies on education were born during that period. Of course, the US beat everyone to the moon in 1969 and still to this day has the world's leading space program, NASA.
8, 7, 6, go for main engine start, 2, 2, 1, booster ignition, and liftoff of the Space Shuttle Discovery.
A lot has changed during that time. Space satellites are now abundant, many belonging to cell phone companies rather than governments. Also, the Soviet Union is now Russia, a democracy who elects presidents and is no longer the United States' #1 threat. But what remains are many of the reforms and beliefs of that era, that young minds must be challenged and nourished and allowed to imagine and explore for future generations to make leaps and bounds across space and time. And for that inspiration, we can thank Sputnik.